The call came in at 2:15 p.m. on a Wednesday, just as I was finishing up my lunch at the station. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. Motorcycle crash on Route 17. Single rider down, possible serious injuries. All units respond. Without a second thought, I grabbed my gear, jumped into the ambulance, and signaled to my partner Zoe to head out. The adrenaline kicked in almost immediately, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to face. It had been 4 years since I last saw her. Rachel Matthews, the woman who shattered my world. The woman who walked away from me without a word of explanation, leaving me standing at the altar. The woman whose face, for years, had been nothing more than a memory I couldn't erase. As Zoe sped through the afternoon traffic, my mind wandered to that day. I had been ready. We had planned everything. It should have been the happiest day of my life. Yet it became the day that changed everything. Rachel disappeared without a trace, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't find her. I called, I searched, but there were no answers. Over time, I threw myself into my work, becoming an EMT. It was my way of coping, of trying to drown out the pain of the past. But no matter how many lives I saved, no matter how many moments of heroism I had, there was always a part of me that felt empty. Tyler, grab the neck brace. Zoe's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I quickly grabbed my medical bag as we pulled up to the scene. Route 17 was a rural stretch of road with sharp curves and a reputation for accidents. I didn't know much about the crash, just that a rider had been thrown from the bike. We needed to move fast. The motorcycle was on its side, the rider pinned underneath. Zoe and I worked together, moving as efficiently as we could, knowing time was critical. Victim's female, mid-20s, unconscious but breathing, Zoe said, noting the head trauma. Looks like a broken leg, too. A firefighter operating the extrication tools shouted, 2 minutes, max! I nodded, trying to focus, trying to push everything else out of my mind. I knelt down by the rider's side, positioning myself to get a closer look. The helmet was cracked, and I could see the long, dark hair spilling out from beneath it. My heart skipped a beat as I adjusted my angle, trying to assess her injuries through the visor. Then the world seemed to freeze. The firefighter shouted, "Got it!" as they pulled the helmet off. The rider's face was exposed, and I recognized her instantly. Rachel. The woman who had once been the love of my life. The woman who had disappeared without a trace. And now she was lying in front of me, badly hurt, and I was the one who had to save her. My hands froze for a moment as my mind struggled to process what was happening. I didn't know what to feel, anger, relief, confusion, but I knew one thing. She was my responsibility now, and I had a job to do. I snapped myself back into focus, my professional training kicking in. Rachel was unconscious, her pulse faint but steady. The head trauma was serious, and I could see blood pooling under her, seeping into the cracked asphalt beneath her. I had to keep my emotions in check, at least for now. Zoe was already preparing the backboard, and the firefighter was working to extricate her from beneath the bike. I knew the longer she stayed trapped, the worse her chances would be. "Tyler, status," Zoe called out, her voice cutting through the haze of emotions swirling in my mind. "Unconscious female, mid-20s," I said, my voice barely steady. "Broken leg, head trauma. She's bleeding heavily. We need to move her fast." Zoe nodded, not needing any more explanation. She had seen plenty of accidents in her career, but this one felt different. It wasn't just another call. It was Rachel, the woman who left me standing alone on the biggest day of my life. I had no idea how to feel as I worked quickly to stabilize her, but I knew that right now, I couldn't afford to feel anything. I needed to do my job. As I placed the cervical collar around her neck, my hands shook slightly. I was so close to her, closer than I had been in years, and my thoughts were a storm. I remembered everything. Her laugh, the way she used to touch my arm when she wanted my attention, the look she gave me the day she walked away. All those memories came flooding back in an instant, and for a split second I hesitated. But then I took a deep breath, blocking out the past, and refocused on the present. I wasn't her fiancé anymore. I was a paramedic, and she was my patient. That's all that mattered now. "Let's move her," I ordered, my voice firm, though it trembled underneath. Zoe and I carefully loaded Rachel onto the stretcher, securing her as best as we could. The journey to the ambulance felt like a blur, the sirens blaring but my mind still spinning with confusion. How had we ended up here? How had she ended up like this? Once inside the ambulance, I continued working on her, adjusting the IV and checking her vitals. Zoe glanced at me in the rearview mirror, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You know her?" she asked, her voice quiet but direct. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the question sink in. "Yeah, I know her," I replied, my voice flat. Zoe didn't press further. She knew how to read me, knew better than to ask too many questions when I was in this state. I focused on Rachel, but my mind kept drifting back to that day, 4 years ago. The wedding day. The day she left me, standing alone at the altar with nothing but my own confusion and heartbreak. The day I learned the woman I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with was gone. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that clouded my thoughts. There was no time to relive the past. There was only the present, the woman I was trying to save, and the years of questions I had been carrying. Why did she leave? Why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she fight for us? I looked at Rachel as she lay there unconscious, her face pale and bruised. She had been my world, and now she was a stranger I had to save. The ambulance ride to the hospital felt endless. Every bump in the road sent a ripple of unease through me. The guilt, the anger, the questions, they all tried to surface again, but I fought them back. Rachel needed me to be calm, to be focused. "Vitals are stabilizing," I reported to Zoe, my voice betraying none of the emotional chaos inside me. "Head trauma, likely a concussion, but we've got it under control for now." Zoe glanced back at me, her face softening for just a moment. She knew how much this was affecting me, but there was no time for that. We were almost at the hospital, and I still had so many unanswered questions. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger conversation with Rachel. When we finally arrived at the hospital, I helped transfer Rachel to the emergency room team. My hands were still trembling, but I pushed through, giving Dr. Jenkins a brief report on her condition. The medical team immediately took over, whisking her away for scans and tests. I stood in the hallway, watching them disappear into the depths of the hospital. The sterile, fluorescent lights overhead did nothing to ease the heaviness in my chest. The questions that had been gnawing at me for years only grew louder, and I couldn't silence them. What happened? Why did she leave? Why did she vanish without a word? The same questions I had asked myself over and over again since the day she disappeared, the day my world fell apart. She had been my everything. Our life together had been planned out. We were supposed to be happy. But that day, the wedding day, she never showed up, and I had been left standing there, alone, not understanding why. I leaned against the wall, running a hand through my hair, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I needed answers. I couldn't leave until I had them, but the waiting game was always the hardest part. "Tyler, are you okay?" Dr. Jenkins's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He was standing a few feet away, his brow furrowed with concern as he looked at me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I chuckled weakly, not quite meeting his eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine, just... this is a lot to process." Jenkins gave me a knowing look. He had been my colleague for a few years now, and I was sure he could see the strain in my face, the tension in my shoulders. He nodded, his expression softening. "She's stable. Broken leg, concussion, some bruising, but she'll be okay. We'll keep her under observation for now. It might take a few hours for her to wake up." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the unease in my chest. I couldn't just stand there and wait. I needed to know why Rachel had left, and now, finally, I might get the chance to hear it from her. The minutes dragged by, stretching into what felt like hours. The hallway seemed colder the longer I stood there. Eventually, a nurse came by, saying Rachel had woken up and was asking for me. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe it. She was awake. I didn't know if I was ready for this moment, but I also knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. I walked to her room, my heart pounding in my chest. When I entered, I found Rachel lying in the bed, her face pale, her eyes a little too wide with the shock of everything that had happened. She looked fragile, smaller somehow than I remembered, but there was still a flicker of recognition in her gaze when she saw me. "Tyler?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of surprise, pain, and guilt. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." I froze, not knowing what to say. The words felt stuck in my throat, as if everything I wanted to say had been trapped inside for too long. But I needed answers, I needed closure, and I needed to know the truth. I finally found my voice. "How are you feeling?" I asked, trying to keep my emotions in check, though my hands were shaking. "Like I got hit by a truck," she muttered with a weak, half-hearted smile. "Which I guess I did." "You're lucky to be alive," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Another few minutes, and I don't know if you'd have made it." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "You saved my life," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't believe it's you. After everything that happened." I sat down in the chair next to her bed, trying to steady myself. But I needed to know. I needed to hear it from her lips. "Rachel, I need to know why you left," I said quietly, my voice strained. "Why didn't you just talk to me? We were about to get married, for God's sake. Why didn't you tell me what was going on?" Her breath hitched as she closed her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might pull away from me. But when she opened her eyes again, I could see the guilt there, the weight of what she had carried for years. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you," she said softly, the words spilling out in a rush. "I left because I thought I was protecting you." Rachel's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't make sense of them. Protecting me? From what? I stared at her, trying to piece together the explanation she was offering. It didn't make sense. We had planned our future together, talked about everything: marriage, kids, where we would live. How could she think leaving me was the right choice? "Protecting me from what?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly as confusion and hurt twisted inside me. Rachel's eyes welled up with tears, her gaze dropping to her hands. She took a shaky breath before speaking again. "I have Huntington's disease, Tyler." Her words were barely a whisper, but they struck me with the force of 1,000 storms. "It's a genetic condition. There's no cure, and I knew it would eventually take everything from me. I didn't want you to go through that with me." I felt a chill run down my spine. Huntington's disease, a condition I had read about in passing, but never really understood. It was progressive, degenerative, and ultimately fatal. The thought of Rachel, the woman I had once loved with all my heart, slowly fading away, losing herself piece by piece, was unbearable. But hearing this from her, right here in front of me, made my chest feel tight, like I couldn't breathe. "I didn't want you to watch me become someone else," she continued, her voice breaking. "I couldn't ask you to live with that, to see me lose my mind, lose my ability to walk, to speak, to be me, and I couldn't. I couldn't ask you to become my caregiver. I thought you deserved more than that, a life with someone who could give you all of herself." She paused, swallowing hard. "I thought it would be easier for you to hate me, to move on, than to watch me deteriorate. I didn't want to trap you in that future." I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking into me like stones dropping into water. She left because she thought it was the right thing to do, because she thought I would be better off without her, that I wouldn't be able to handle the slow, painful progression of her disease. My hands trembled, and I felt a surge of anger, but not at her. Not anymore. I was angry at the circumstances, at life for dealing us this cruel hand. I could feel the years of unresolved pain, the confusion of that day, the wedding day, flooding back. But now, it all seemed so insignificant. The anger I had carried for so long over her leaving, the hurt of being abandoned at the altar, all of it faded into the background of the overwhelming truth she had just laid out for me. "Rachel, I don't know what to say," I whispered, my throat tight. I reached for her hand, my fingers brushing against hers. She didn't pull away this time. "I understand why you thought you were doing the right thing, but you didn't give me a choice. You didn't let me decide. We could have faced it together." She closed her eyes for a moment, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't think you'd want to. I couldn't ask you to go through that with me. I was trying to protect you." I felt my heart ache for her. She thought she was protecting me, but in the process, she had made the decision for both of us. And I had spent the last 4 years carrying the weight of that decision, wondering if I wasn't enough for her, if I hadn't been worth the fight. I squeezed her hand, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "You didn't have to protect me, Rachel. I would have stood by you. I would have been there no matter what. We could have faced it together. You weren't alone in this." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, as if she had never truly believed that. I was scared, she whispered. I was scared of losing myself and of losing you in the process. I didn't know what else to do. I nodded, feeling the weight of everything she had carried alone. I get it now, I said quietly, a sense of understanding beginning to take root. But I wish you had told me. I wish we could have figured it out together. Rachel wiped at her tears and nodded, her voice barely audible. I know. I'm so sorry, Tyler. I sat back, looking at her, the woman I once thought I would spend my life with. She wasn't the same person, and neither was I. But as I sat there, a part of me knew we could still find a way forward. The past was gone, but there was still a future to rebuild, even if it wasn't the one we had originally imagined. We can't change the past, I said softly, but we can try to figure out the future. Together. It felt like time stood still in that room, as if the weight of everything that had happened, all the years of silence, pain, and unanswered questions, had finally caught up with both of us. We were both different people now, shaped by the past, but no longer controlled by it. The love we once had wasn't gone. It had just been buried under so much fear, guilt, and misunderstanding. But I could feel something shift between us in that moment. A sense of understanding, the kind I had been longing for since the day Rachel disappeared, started to settle in. I've spent so long angry at you, I confessed quietly, my voice trembling slightly as I spoke. Angry because you left, angry because I didn't know why. I thought I wasn't enough for you, but hearing you now, I can't stay angry anymore. You were trying to protect me, and I get that, but you didn't give me a chance to decide. Rachel nodded slowly, her tears still flowing. She looked like a different person, vulnerable, fragile, but more open than I had ever seen her. I know, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I thought it would be easier to just leave, to make that decision for both of us, because I couldn't stand the idea of you watching me deteriorate. I thought you'd be better off without me. I reached out, gently taking her hand in mine, feeling the tremor in her fingers. Rachel, I would have stayed. I would have stayed through all of it, no matter how hard it got. You weren't a burden to me. You never were. She squeezed my hand, her eyes locking with mine. I'm sorry, she said softly. I was so scared, Tyler. I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't want you to have to carry the weight of it with me. The air between us felt different now, lighter, even though the circumstances hadn't changed. The future still seemed uncertain, and the road ahead would be tough, but there was no more bitterness between us. We were no longer two people burdened by the past. We were two people who had finally faced the truth, and that made all the difference. Rachel, I don't know what comes next, I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. But I know one thing for sure. I'm not walking away again. We'll figure this out, no matter what. She smiled weakly, her tear-streaked face softening, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. I don't know if I deserve that, she said, almost apologetically, but there was no doubt in her voice now. I don't know if I deserve you, after everything I've put you through. You deserve to be loved, Rachel. You deserve to have someone by your side, even when life doesn't go according to plan. I leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're not alone anymore. We're in this together now. She nodded, her lips trembling as she whispered, together. For a moment, we just sat there, holding hands in the quiet of the room. The weight of everything was still there, but it didn't feel as crushing anymore. It felt like we had a chance, even with the uncertainty of the future, even with the challenges ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be hard days. There would be days when the disease would take more from her, when she'd feel like giving up, and days when I'd feel helpless. But what I knew in that moment was that we were no longer bound by the past. We weren't just survivors of what had happened. We were now partners, standing together in the face of what was to come. We had found each other again, not the people we had been, but the people we had become. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The days that followed Rachel's confession were a blur of emotions and decisions. As she recovered from her injuries, we found ourselves talking more than we ever had before. Every conversation felt like a small step toward understanding each other. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still walking on a tightrope, balancing between the past and the future. Every word we spoke seemed to bring us closer to the truth, but the reality of her condition loomed over us like a shadow, never far away. Rachel was stronger than I had given her credit for. Despite everything, her diagnosis, the guilt she had carried alone for so long, she was still the woman I had fallen in love with. She was determined to keep fighting, to keep living her life despite the uncertainty ahead. I admired her courage, but I also saw the cracks that she had been hiding. She was trying to make the most of the time she had left, but I could see the fear in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. It was the fear of becoming someone she didn't recognize, the fear of losing herself piece by piece. One evening, a few weeks after the accident, Rachel and I sat in the park near her apartment, watching the sunset. It was one of the few calm moments we had shared, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like everything was okay. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I could feel the weight of her emotions, heavy but somehow comforting. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I was alone in all of this. I thought I could never ask anyone to share this burden with me. But now, I'm not so sure anymore." Her voice was filled with a quiet vulnerability that made my heart ache. "I'm scared, Tyler. Scared of what's coming. Scared of what I'm becoming." I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. "You don't have to be scared anymore," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Rachel looked up at me, her eyes searching mine, as if she needed to make sure I was telling the truth. "But what if it gets worse? What if I can't take care of myself? What if I forget who you are?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I cupped her face gently, tilting it so I could look into her eyes. "I'll be there," I said firmly, "for all of it, every single part of it. You don't have to go through this alone. I'll be right here, even when it gets hard, especially when it gets hard." She smiled then, a small but genuine smile, and I knew in that moment that we were both beginning to let go of the past, to finally accept the future, whatever it might look like. Rachel's condition would change, and there would be days when it felt like too much, but one thing I knew for sure was that we were in this together. We had faced the pain of the past, and we had chosen to move forward, not with all the answers, but with a commitment to facing the unknown as a team. "I don't know what's coming next," Rachel said softly, her fingers tracing circles on my hand. "But I'm not so scared anymore, not with you by my side." I kissed her forehead, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "We'll figure it out," I said, my heart full. Together. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate balance between normalcy and uncertainty. Rachel and I were learning how to live with the reality of her diagnosis, taking things day by day, sometimes moment by moment. Her symptoms were still mild, but there were signs, little things that slipped through the cracks. The tremor in her left hand when she tried to pour herself a cup of coffee, the way her words sometimes caught in her throat when she spoke. At first, I pretended not to notice, but it was getting harder to ignore. She was changing. The disease was slowly, quietly claiming pieces of her, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It was early one morning, a few months after Rachel's accident, when I noticed something that shook me to my core. We were sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and talking about the plans we had for the weekend, when she suddenly froze mid-sentence. Her hand trembled as she set her mug down, and for a few seconds, her eyes seemed to lose focus. The smile she had been wearing faded, replaced by a look of confusion, and I felt my heart lurch in my chest. "Rachel?" I asked, leaning forward, my voice filled with concern. She blinked, shaking her head as if trying to clear something from her mind. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a little dizzy." But I could see it. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her hand trembled more than usual. I didn't say anything at first, but I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just a bad day. This was something more. The progression of her disease was starting to show itself in ways that I couldn't pretend were just bad days anymore. I stood up, walking over to her side of the table. Without thinking, I gently took her hand, feeling the slight tremor that had become all too familiar. "Rachel, we need to talk about this," I said, my voice soft but firm. "We can't just ignore it anymore." She looked at me, her face etched with vulnerability. "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know it's getting worse. I just didn't want to admit it, Tyler. I didn't want you to see it. I didn't want to see it. I squeezed her hand, my heart aching for her. You don't have to hide it from me. I'm here. We're in this together, remember? She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm scared, she said, her voice trembling. What if I forget who you are? What if I lose myself before I even have the chance to say goodbye? I felt the weight of her words, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full force of the reality we were facing. It wasn't just about loving each other in the good times anymore. It was about loving each other through the uncertainty, through the pain, through the inevitable losses that lay ahead. It was about being there, even when the woman I loved wasn't the same woman I had fallen in love with. Rachel, you don't have to be afraid, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens, I'll remember you. I'll remember who you are, and I'll love you, even when you don't recognize yourself. She looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope, even if it was faint. She didn't smile, but there was a softness in her expression, as if for the first time in a while, she felt the weight of her fear lift just a little. Together? She asked quietly. I nodded, squeezing her hand. Always. And in that moment, as we sat there, holding each other's hands and facing the unknown, I realized that love isn't just about holding on to the person you remember. It's about holding on to them no matter what, even when everything else changes. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes the hardest challenges come when we least expect them. If you're facing difficult times or unexpected changes, remember that communication and honesty are key. Don't be afraid to share your fears, your struggles, or your vulnerabilities with those you trust. Love isn't about perfection. It's about support, understanding, and standing by each other through both the good and bad times. Don't shy away from tough conversations or the truth. Sometimes it's the only way to truly move forward. And always remember, you don't have to face life's challenges alone. Together, we are stronger.